And that might not sound like a big deal if you don't see yourself as a creative person, but we use our creative side of our brain to problem solve. And so this can affect all areas of our life, including our marriage, how we deal with our kids, how we're dealing with our work. And so, as you can imagine, like not being able to get creative in our problem solving skills can really take a toll on our relationships and our different responsibilities. So, when we talk about like all or nothing, we're kind of really talking about having a fixed mindset in certain areas. So, something I've been learning is that um, in terms of having a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, you can have a growth mindset in some things and then have a fixed mindset in others. And I had never viewed it that way. I remember growing up in like probably seventh or eighth grade, our teacher would tell us about like growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And there's like multiple books on it. But I always just assumed you were one or the other. And so wrapping my head around this concept that it's not just one or the other, and you know you can actually have a growth mindset in one area of your life and then a fixed mindset in the other has been like really eye-opening for me, and it made so much sense. And so having that flexibility to say I'm not just a fixed or I'm not just a growth, and knowing that like I can be both at the same time actually made it easier for me to admit to myself where I was having a fixed mindset. And so I was able to start making those changes, and that's been extremely helpful for me. So I just wanted to start this episode with that because I thought, hey, that could be really helpful for someone else out there who maybe has heard about growth and fixed mindset, but has never like clicked in their head that they could be both or that they could have areas in one or the other. So I wanted to share that with you guys, and now we're going to talk a little more about this whole all or nothing thing and how it affects our family and our different relationships within the family. So like your marriage and your relationship to your kids. So let's start with how this always or never mindset can hurt your spouse. And when I say always or never, I'm referencing like when you would say to your spouse, you always do this or you never do this. And so I think this is a common problem of these kind of words that we get sucked into using. Like, I don't really know where it starts. It's just kind of a picked up behavior that we kind of dramatize a little bit. And we're focusing on the negative. This is, there's a word for it. It's called negativity bias. And it's your amygdala that controls this part of your brain. And your brain is naturally more inclined to focus on negative things because that's a survival instinct for your brain. And so this is like a huge part of the beginning of our coaching curriculum because we really talk about like the amygdala more and the growth versus fixed mindset and negativity bias, what the amygdala is prone to do naturally. And so that's like a huge foundation in the starting of our coaching curriculum because it is so necessary. And like even just going through it myself, as I've been really trying to digest the material, I've been having so many like realizations and just I don't even 100% know what the correct word is right now. It's just been a really huge and eye-opening for me. So this is something that I've struggled with in my own marriage. So I'm coming to you from a place of I've been there, not a place of like, oh, look at me, I'm better than you, because that's not it at all. I honestly still kind of struggle to not say always or never to my husband. And I mean, there's times where he says it to me, but he doesn't seem to struggle with it as much as me for some reason. But I'm really tend to like like see a problem in the moment, and then like all of a sudden I'm connecting all the dots of all the times that it's happened before or something similar's happened, and it's like it just comes out. It's like, bleh, you always da 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 da, you know? And so I have to train my brain when I want to say that to force myself to think about times he didn't do that, or times he did, what I wanted him to, or he did a good job on something. And so obviously that may vary by what the situation is, but we kind of amplify what the problem is. That's the point here. And so this can lead to us jumping to conclusions that aren't always true. And we have to really remember here that our thoughts are not always true. We have thoughts that, they tell us things in our head, but just because we're thinking it doesn't make it true. And so we have to learn to question those thoughts. And so that's kind of like the foundation of what we're going to talk about today, because I need you to wrap your head around the fact that our thoughts aren't always true, and we need to question them, so that as we're going through this, you kind of have that foundation of like, okay, so when my brain says you always or you never, or jumps to these all or nothing mindsets, we don't have to listen to it. We can be like, okay, that's interesting that you think that, or that's an option, but we don't have to just say, okay, well, this is my thought, this is the truth, I'm picking this one. And so if you've never been taught this, which again, this is why I love this coaching curriculum, and because this is another one of those sayings that we talk about in there, but I really want to give you guys like the bite-sized version of it today in this podcast, so you can really have that jumping off point moving through the rest of the episode. So yeah, just keep that in mind, and now we're going to move on to the next points. So we've kind of talked about what that looks like with your spouse, and now I want you to really like kind of imagine with me that we're in this situation, and I want you to imagine that you're the one receiving this. And so I want you to imagine maybe a time that this did happen, or if you can't think of a time this has ever happened, just imagine that it, an imaginary scenario of it happening. And so I want you to think about how you feel when your spouse says you always insert something that they don't like, or you never insert something that they're always asking you to do. And you immediately think of a time that you did the thing they said you never do, or didn't do the thing they said you always do. And so, right, because if you've ever been in this situation like me, you probably immediately know what I'm talking about. But it's like that sense of someone says, you never take the trash out, and immediately in your brain, you think of the time that you took the trash out. And then you're not even listening to what they're saying, because now all you're thinking in your head is, I need to correct them. I need to tell them there was that time I took the trash out, and maybe it wasn't one time, but, just for sake of, for example. And so, or it could be the other way. You always talk down to me in front of the kids, and you're thinking in your head, I don't always do that. And it's all you can think about, and you're playing through scenarios in your head where you chose not to talk down to him in front of the kids, or her, whether you're looking at this from the husband or wife's perspective here. But either way, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good, right? When you think about how you feel in that situation, some, for everyone it might be a little different, but some words that might come to mind is like, you feel like you're being disrespected in a way. And you feel like you're not being loved because your partner's only seeing like a bad thing about you in that moment. You may feel like they are missing the good things that you've done, or that they're taking one little thing and, making it huge, which can feel like it's almost becoming a part of your identity, or they're trying to make it part of who you are. And so while your spouse probably isn't thinking any of those things or intentionally doing those things to make you, they're not intentionally making you feel that way, but that you might start to internalize what they're saying in a way that's harmful without them realizing it and maybe without even you realizing it. And so now that we've kind of like laid that foundation of how you feel in that position, I want you to remember that going forward so that you aren't the one putting your spouse in that position. Because while we can't control what our spouse does, we can control ourselves. And so if we imagine like what that's like for us, it helps us not want to put our partner in that position, and not putting our partner in that position and, leading in love, showing an example of love and making better choices. It will slowly start to change their behavior over time in most cases. So I really encourage you to start there. Just work on yourself and treat your spouse the way you would want to be treated, taking into account what they like or dislike, right? Don't just do something you like that your partner doesn't like, but like overall, it is part of treating your spouse the way you'd want to be treated, because you would want your spouse to take into consideration what you like or don't like. So that is something important to keep in mind here as well. Okay, now that we've talked about the spousal part of this, I want you guys as spouses, if you're doing this together or separately, just to really reflect on your parenting here as well. And I want you to remember that when you have this all or nothing mindset of, always or never, but this can show up in other ways too. That was just my one example, but this can show up in even how you clean the house. Like maybe you, for some reason, you're stuck in this mental rut of, if I can't clean the entire house or I can't do the entire sink of dishes, then I'm not going to do anything. Even if you could have just spared 5 minutes to sweep the floor or wash a couple dishes. And so getting into those mental ruts of, I have to do it all or I can't do anything, that can really make your time management horrible, for one. It destroys creativity, like we said, which is necessary for problem solving. And so to really ask ourselves where we are doing this, it's best to look at what are the biggest problems in our life right now that aren't solved. And so maybe you can't keep up on the laundry, or you can't keep up on the dishes, or your kids are always screaming, running around at mealtime, or you and your spouse are always getting in the same argument at the same time over the same thing. And, you get stuck in these patterns that you absolutely hate. You despise them. You don't want to be in them. You might not even notice that it is a pattern at first, or that it is a repeating problem, or that it's something that needs to be solved. But when you take a second and you sit down and you think about, what right now in my life is not working, what is causing me stress, or is just like, I don't really like this, that's when you can start to see where these things are showing up, where your all or nothing mindsets are blossoming, I guess we could say. Although that word is kind of overly positive for the current topic. And so, I really encourage you, if you have a coach or a friend, or even your spouse, just talk about this with someone so that they can kind of like question what you're saying, right? You need someone who's going to reflect back to you what you're saying and ask you intentional questions. And that's kind of like my favorite part of coaching is, when I'm doing this, like even just with my friends, just for fun, it like helps them open up their mind to see things or think through things that they hadn't like actually set aside the time to think about or think through yet. And that's when, like, you get your own intense breakthroughs. It's not that someone else is coming in and blabbing a ton of information at you. It's just that they're helping you figure out what you already know and what you already want. And so these things, we already know what our biggest problem points are, but if we've never sat down to actually talk about it or think about it or even pray about it, then it might continue to be overlooked. So I encourage you to start there. And also, I just want to touch on the point that, like, our kids are watching us, right? And so we have to remember this, because if we're partaking in these all or nothing mindsets and this becomes a habit in our household, it is going to spread to our kids. They are always watching and learning from us. And so we don't want to teach our kids that they should have an all or nothing mindset or that they should focus on the negative. And so as we are learning these things and as we're implementing them, we want to start teaching our kids and just remembering, like, don't even have an all or nothing mindset here. It's not that you have to fix your whole life before you start teaching your kids this stuff. You just need to be one step ahead of them. And so even if it's one area where you have begun to improve your all or nothing mindset, you can teach that to your kid. And so just helping them wrap their heads around this concept even a little will give them, a starting point, a foundation. And they might not understand it all in one sitting the first time, but the more that you can reinforce these things, the better, so that when they get to those adult years, they are leaps and bounds ahead of where maybe we started, And so, because as adults, as parents, it's our job to prepare our children and prepare the next generation for, what is gonna be required of them as they grow into adults and they get older and they take on more responsibility. And so this is one of the ways that we can lay a very solid, very beneficial foundation for them. So that's a really great way to look at it. Just jumping into the next point here, having, an all or nothing mindset, in our home, as we touched on, affects our kids, and as we also touched on, affects our spouse. And so what we really want to sit down and ask ourselves is, how else can I see this all or nothing mindset showing up in my life? And I say how else because I'm assuming that as you were listening to this, you might have had things pop in your head. So if you're not taking notes, I really encourage you to actually write this down, because I know that our days, they can get really busy and chaotic. And so, if you're driving right now, obviously you might have to wait. Or you could just, if you're able, voice memo yourself, like pause this and then say, hey Siri, open voice memos, and then just click the button and you can talk to yourself or something. But however you want to take notes, just get this stuff down today, because if you keep pushing it off, you might not come back to it. And this really is important for the entire family, and it might not seem like a huge deal because it's mental, right? And so it may not be something that we can tangibly, physically feel or see in front of us. And so we can sometimes have a tendency to write that off if we're not someone who likes, mental exercises or even just being internally aware. So don't push it off. Ask yourself these questions now. What else in my life is showing up as an all or nothing mindset? And like I said, we can see this easiest when we look at what are the biggest problems in my life that are not being solved right now. And so I really encourage you to start there, and then we can begin healing these all or nothing mindsets by taking these thoughts captive and making them obedient to Christ, like the scriptures say. And so I'm going to kind of give you like a step-by-step here. One, you want to notice that you're having this thought and that it is in the all or nothing category, that you were maybe dramatizing it or blowing it out of proportion, or you just seem to have like a fixed mindset here where you feel like there's no room for growth. You were either born with it, or you don't have it. And so noticing those spots where you're kind of having this tendency to have that all or nothing mindset, that's the first step. Just notice. And then once you've noticed, you can notice that you maybe have a negativity bias here, that you're noticing more of the negative side than focusing on the positive side. And without judging yourself, you have to ask yourself, what is really behind this thought, right? So we don't want to judge the thought. We just want to notice it's there. We don't want to immediately say it's good or bad. just kind of notice, and then kind of notice if it's an all or nothing thought or not, and notice if there's some negativity bias there, and then don't judge yourself as much as possible. I know this can be hard, and really get inquisitive about what's causing this, how far back this goes. Was there a time where this wasn't in an all or nothing category? Has it always been there? Was there an event tied to this that maybe caused you to have an all or nothing mindset here? And so asking yourself those questions can really help. And so once you've done that and you maybe got some answers, or realized how deep this goes, if there's something behind it or not, and then you can now notice or decide if this is a thought you do or don't want to have. And now that you've dug a little deeper on why, you can kind of zoom out and look at alternative thoughts that you could have and recognize maybe positive memories that would counteract this thought, or a positive point of view that your thoughts could have, and recognize that your brain might be skipping over some of your positive memories because of its negativity bias. And so essentially in this step, you just want to pick, if this is a thought you don't want to have, then you need to find your replacement thought. And so you can kind of, I say zoom out in your mind and look at what are the other thought options that you could have here, and ask yourself, what thought could I have around this that would feel good? And then, kind of pick the one that aligns with your Christ-centered values, and the one that feels the most needed or the most joyful. And then you're going to practice this. And I know that sounds a little silly, like you're going to practice your thought, but as we've talked in previous episodes, and we will probably continue to talk about this till the end of time, the more you think something, the more it is creating that neural pathway in your mind. And so as the thought goes through over and over again, it becomes easier for the thought to go through. And your brain starts to notice that this is an important thought. And the more you think it, the more likely it is to become a belief. And so we really want to be intentional about this. And so when I say practicing this thought, I mean, you could just start by saying it once a day if that seems what's easiest for you. You could, put it up somewhere, like on a wallpaper on your phone, or on a sticky note on the wall, somewhere that you would see it regularly. And this is not my favorite method for me personally, because I will start to look over it once it becomes part of my normal circumstances. It just becomes a background to me. So for me, I like to set aside either time in prayer or just time to myself, quiet, to think, to really reflect on the thought and intentionally tie positive emotions to it, and so emotions that maybe I would feel if I believed the thought, because you might think it, force yourself to think it and not necessarily feel like you believe it yet, and that's normal. And it might even feel weird for you because you've never done it before, but just beginning to practice these thoughts and do this more and more will help you start to believe it, and then it won't feel so weird, and it might even start happening naturally. And so this doesn't just have to be one thought, but I encourage you to start with one. And I would say don't start with more than 3, because like I said, it feels weird, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed and give up because you're doing something different. And so if you just start small and you keep doing it consistently, then once you feel like you've got those 1 to 3 thoughts down and you're comfortable with them and they feel natural now, then you can add on more, choose different ones, notice other areas that you need to add thoughts in. But starting small will make it more realistic for you to continue consistently. And, going big is not necessarily helpful if we only go big for, a couple days or a week or a month, and then we give up. And so if we can be consistent. That's really what matters. So asking yourself, what is going to make me most consistent in this is what's going to be most beneficial for you. So before we get off, I just wanted to say that remembering that just learning knowledge is not what's going to change your life is really important. And maybe you've never heard anyone say this before. I know that I really hadn't necessarily heard this in a way that made sense to me. And I love learning, so I'm not like dissing on learning at all. Like, I'm constantly learning on my own at home. And so I think everyone should keep learning. And that's not what I'm saying here. But what I'm saying is don't just keep inputting. And I believe we've talked about this before too, like the ratio of inputting to outputting. And so if you're just constantly putting in knowledge, reading more things, listening to more podcasts, you know, taking more classes, going through more courses, but you don't actually take the time to journal on these things, think through them, take time to digest them, reread them. And then the most important part here is that you have practical application. It's the work that you put into it. That's what you're going to get out of it. And so if you are constantly like trying to input things constantly, and I think that for me at least, and maybe for you, this can be like a dopamine hit for us, is like learning feels good. Inputting feels good, watching more videos, reading more things, learning more information. But if we just overload our brains with information and learn, and then we don't take the time to practically apply those things in our lives, then the information is, most of it's going to get lost, and it's not really going to do us any good because we didn't summarize it and take something out of it. And so if I told you all this, you listened to this entire podcast and you did absolutely nothing, yeah, you might have learned something. You might take away a snippet that you can maybe pass on or remember later, but you're not going to really see results in your life. And so remember that what you put into it, you will get out of it. So I really encourage you guys, if you did not take notes, if you did not write down things that you want to practice or work on, then I really encourage you guys to just click on this episode and add it to your playlist again so that you can re-listen to this, or save it to come back later, or text it to yourself, because you gotta do the work to get something out of it. So, and I just have a Bible verse to go along with this before we hop off. It's Corinthians 9:6, and it says, "The point of this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully." Again, just reestablishing what we put in, we're going to get out. And so be generous to yourself. Give yourself the time to do the work. If you guys need further accountability, you want someone to help you with this, to help you be consistent and to work with you one-on-one, please book a free coaching consultation with me. I do have very limited availability, so make sure you book now if you want to get in. And I just want to say that the goal of these calls is not just to sell you on something. It really is to help you and also to figure out what's best for you moving forward. And so if that's not working with me, that's fine. And I just want to throw that out there because I know that I can be hesitant to get on calls with people when I feel like I'm just going to be pitched to, and that's not at all what this is. So I hope you guys have a blessed day. I am praying for you, and I look forward to meeting you guys in the Facebook group. So bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you got so much value out of it. And if you loved this episode, could you do me a quick favor and click 5 stars and leave me a review? It would do wonders for spreading the podcast out to other people who need it, and it only takes a few seconds. If you have an additional few seconds, why don't you go ahead and screenshot the episode and share it to your stories so we can spread the message and get more families healed. Thank you, and until next time, I will be praying for you, and I hope you have a blessed day. Bye.